Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on data breach incident response in an ever-changing threat landscape. Today, we're going to cover a lot of ground, specifically about incident responses when they involve third parties. So stick with us today, and we're going to cover some really good information, give you some tools and tips and tricks to deal with these complicated problems, and hopefully reduce the risk to your own data as well as student data in your systems. Now, with that saying, let's talk about why this is important. You have spent a lot of years hardening your own castle. And then as we outsource to this vendor or third party, they drop the ball and your phones light up. So pretty much everyone here has lived through some sort of this is not even our system incident in the past that involved some sort of partner or third-party service provider. This session today is about how you prepare for, handle, and recover from incidents that may not even be happening at your school. We all have vendors and partner systems that are either interconnected with our own or that process our data by themselves. We worry a lot about what happens when the incident involves our technology, but what happens when it's not our systems, but it's still our data? Now, before we get into the nitty gritty, I just want to do a quick housekeeping and vibe check. Expect today's session is going to be in plain English. We're not really going to dig into a whole lot of tech. We're not going to get too mired down in details. We are going to try to keep it a little light and humorous. We are certainly not going to be any kind of vendor shaming or anything of this nature. Our vendors are doing the best that they can, and just like our own systems, sometimes bad things happen and there are incidents or data breaches there. Obviously, in these webinars, there tend to be a lot of folks with questions. So if you're viewing this webinar and you have some questions, please feel free to send us your questions at privacyta@ed.gov. That's privacyta@ed.gov, and we would be more than happy to reach out to you and help you solve those issues, answer those questions, or connect you with resources that can help get to the bottom of whatever questions you have about incident response and third parties. Well, so a little about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about framing this challenge. We're gonna bound this with a little bit of information. We're going to walk through the first 120 minutes of a data breach. We're going to learn about what to ask vendors and decide when to notify, sort of build that framework on when we need to notify people and when can we simply act. And we're going to practice some communications skills, get some best practices in place for that. We're going to talk about contracts, best practices for writing written agreements. We're going to talk about patterns that we're seeing in cases throughout the education community. We're going to conduct sort of a mock mini tabletop, and we're going to run over some quick wins that you can ship this week to help reduce the risk to your data and position you better to deal with any incidents that might pop up, including these third parties. So at the end of this session, we're hoping to leave you with some practical tools, like a 10-step IR playbook. We want to make sure that success here is not defined by perfection, but predictability. Incident response is all about predictability, your ability to know what comes next and how to address it and how to wrap that all up in a bow at the end is going to be the difference between a, incident response where you can quickly get a hold of things and one that just runs off the rails and becomes a nightmare. So hopefully you'll take some good information away from today's session. And with that in mind, let's talk about where we are. I like to ask this question of all the crowds that I talk to about incident response. Has a vendor incident touched your data in the last 18 months? Yes, not sure, or not yet. And notice there's no choice there for no, right? So if you're unsure, that's pretty much an answer, right? This sets the stage for why visibility and vendor discipline matters. Use the results of this question when you're answering. You're thinking about, hey, over the last 18 months, have we had some sort of vendor incident, whether that be, a SIS provider or a SaaS provider or a platform that we use or a partner that we exchange data with? Have they experienced a cyber incident? So use the results of that question to kind of foreshadow what's coming. We're going to talk about things like data maps, vendor requests for information, and the importance of notification decisions, when to notify and how to notify. Now, if you've been around in the last year or so, there have been several giant vendor breaches that have touched almost everybody in the education system. From the perspective of the school, I mean, sure, it was the vendor who goofed, right? But in the end, that doesn't stop parents or students from calling us, right? Calling the district or the school or the college. Now did it. So whenever you have a situation where there is a vendor breach, remember, from the perspective of the parents and the students, it's not the vendor's breach, it's the school's breach. Families, your staff, regulators don't care whose logo is on the box. They just know that their data is at risk, right? So the thing to remember here is that you can outsource services and functions, but you can't outsource accountability, right? You're not off the hook. This is not a way to divest yourself of the risk of data breach. Remember, those who experience the breach do so through your logo and oftentimes your help desk, right? So you have to plan for every vendor problem. It's also your problem, and the scale that comes with that. So what counts as a third-party data breach? Well, it's not just ransomware. We think a lot about it, and when you kind of think to what's affecting schools from our perspective, ransomware is the first thing that kind of hits us in the face, right? Oh, it's ransomware. It's not just ransomware. Think of other things that are going on in the ed space. Think about sub-processors, your CRMs, your air quotes secure file transfer protocols, the various ed tech apps that we use in and out of the classroom, and various APIs that we use to exchange information and conduct outsourcing and that sort of thing with these outside parties, right? Think about exfiltration. Think about incidents where through a technical glitch, some bad actor is able to get access to your network, and the data might be flowing out of your network, or combinations where you see things like ransomware ending up being an extortion attempt and ending up with your data on the dark web. Think about simple misconfigurations where perhaps sensitive data was uploaded to a folder that wasn't configured properly. And things like token abuse and some of these new generation of things like multi-factor authentication fatigue attacks and other sorts of technical attacks which use tokens or abuse users into allowing things to happen from a technical perspective. Schools are extra exposed compared to the rest of the sort of the industry of folks on the internet. Schools are extra exposed because our architecture unlike many others, is kind of like a thrift store, right? It's useful for us in terms of teaching kids. But it tends to be eclectic. It's varied. It's a hodgepodge of technologies, and it's not always labeled, right? We tend to make things just work. Um, it's also an area which is pretty tight on budgets and skill set, right? We don't have an abundance of seasoned IT professionals that we can just have around in case something goes wrong, right? We tend to run on a shoestring budget. And attackers know exactly what our schedules are, what our deliverables, if you will, are for the public. Whether that's enrollment times or whether standardized exams are being given or when student aid disbursements happen, the attackers are well aware of what our stress points are and are able to take advantage of those stress points when it matters the most to us, to incentivize us, if you will, to pay extortions, for example. So the point here is that exposure is structural, right? It's not some sort of moral failing on our part. It's by the nature of education, our systems tend to be a little bit more exposed because of what we do in terms of teaching kids that sort of critical aspect of society. We are a greater target. And so we need to do what we can as an industry to simplify, either through contracting, so tighter contracts, writing better written agreements to make sure that when we outsource services, we hedge our bets on the security side to reduce risk, or to maintain a data minimization aspect of this. Does the vendor really need all of those data sets, or can we give them a limited data set and that way, if something happens, we've reduced our risk, reduced the impact to that. Or whether it's through things like segmentation, not only in our own networks, but making sure that our vendors follow these same practices, right? Make sure the vendors have good cybersecurity controls, things like client separation and network segmentation to make sure that an attack that exposes one client doesn't spill over into others. Know your data, right? When a vendor calls, you don't have days sort of rediscovering where your data lives within that space, right? And that's where the power of a data map comes in, right? It's a simple one-page map that includes, hey, what fields does this vendor have, right? Where does it live? What is the transport for that data? What are the retention policies around that data? Who owns the data in that vendor? List it out. Is this employee data? Is this student data? Who are the owners? Who's the points of contact for that? Um, you know, and do you have a kill switch? Can you reach out to that organization and say, hey, cut it off, delete it, stop it, whatever? Um, you know, and again, never let perfection be the enemy of good, right? So any map that you can create, even if it's not a complete one, is better than nothing. And it's like good enough today beats perfect never, right? Because it's never going to be perfect, right? But the idea here is when your vendor, whichever vendor that happens to be, has a breach, it's often days before you can get a hold of that vendor to find out, what happened, what data was affected, etc. By creating these data maps, these little one-page sort of Excel spreadsheets, you can quickly reference it, open it up, keep it in the incident response manual, right? Make it an appendix, whip down that 3-ring binder, and you can just pull to that tab that has that vendor, and you know what information you've given them, you know what their data retention policies are. All that information is already pre-recorded so that you can immediately start to triage and incident respond based on the fact that you understand that this vendor had a breach and you know all of the data that that vendor has, right? And again, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but good today beats perfect never. So I encourage you to do that. Go through your vendors. First, create a list of all of them, and then create those maps. We're going to talk a lot about data maps in today's session as we continue to go through here. So let's talk about our people, right? Roles in the room. This is the importance of an incident response team, having one identified, right? To know what individuals do what roles within the incident response process. Incidents fail when everybody is kind of unsure about what everybody's responsibilities are, right? So create that incident response team. Even if it's a third-party breach, remember that you're still going to get calls about it. You're still going to have reporters asking you for statements. You're still going to have angry parents and students calling, etc. So it doesn't matter if the technical incident happened at your school or your college. It's still your incident to run. And so make sure you have that team identified. Now, I tend to take a two-tiered approach to this. Um, incident response is a big, wide scope of possible incidents, right? And that goes everything from Godzilla walking through the parking lot to fires and floods and earthquakes to cyber attacks and third-party data breaches, right? So there's always going to be a core group that is sort of involved in the incident regardless of what the type of incident it is. And then there's going to be sort of a list of ad hoc members which are going to be involved in the case that their particular area of responsibility is involved. Now, the core might be things like, of course, you would have an incident manager, your legal counsel, communications and PR, because messaging is always important no matter what the incident is, and leadership. That might be a good sort of start to a core of your incident response team. And your ad hoc team members might consist of things like your vendor representatives, like the points of contact at each of those outsourced vendors or partners. It might be IT. Now, I would argue that IT might be more on the core side than the ad hoc side, but in a case of a breach involving cyber, certainly IT would be involved. And it could be various system owners or other stakeholders that might be involved depending on the data involved in the incident or the nature of the incident, right? And so by doing this, you craft a list of those who will be involved in the breach response, and you will also have sort of a roles and responsibilities listed for them, right? Now the emphasis here is having a team is great, but you do need to have an incident manager. Right? The person who herds the cats, who's responsible for moving the incident from initiation to conclusion. And that incident lead should have some actual authority with respect to conducting the incident response. You need to have some sort of scribe, whether that be some automated system that records everything or someone tasked as a scribe who is documenting when things occur, because it is so super critical that you understand the importance of recording what the incident looks like when things happen and what your incident response steps are. So these time-stamped sort of decisions they're absolutely worth their weight in gold when you're doing your postmortems. And if you have some sort of regulatory review, you can walk back through the incident. Now, when we're talking about third-party breaches, like in this session today, it is also important to ensure that you manage communications with that vendor. You don't want multiple voices contacting the vendor from different angles. You want to have one person or a limited number of people that engage with the vendor, and those people should be on the same page, right? When they get lots of communications from different people, it's hard to know how to respond. And so having that single point of contact ensures quick response, it ensures the proper information flow, and it makes sure that no balls get dropped in the process. Along with your incident response team, it is critical that having a team is great, but that leadership presence is super important. You're going to run into a lot of decision processes, inflection points during the response process in which some command decisions are going to have to be made. And so leadership or one of their delegates should be present, should be part of the incident response team. To be there to make decisions on the fly in concert with the incident manager. And so they're not getting information just from status updates, they're hearing it real time. So yeah, again, have a team, make sure you have that strong core, make sure you've got a good solid list of ad hoc members depending on the context of the incident. Make sure you have good comms and PR. Limit the number of people that talk to the vendors. Make sure you have that single point of communication with that vendor so that you have consistency and you don't lose any information in the process. And super important, make sure that leadership is present, whether that is a member of leadership sitting in with the incident response team or one of their delegated representatives being there to represent leadership in the team for the need to make quick decisions and to ensure that information is not delayed flowing up to leadership. So let's talk quick about law and policy. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because, well, frankly, there's a lot to cover, and I am not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. We're talking about order of operations here, right? So when we're talking about our policy, start with the contract, right? Look for, pull the vendor agreement and the security addendum. See if you see things like notice windows, right? 24 or 72 hours, whatever it happens to be. Look for things like artifact sharing. Will they provide you with reports? Can they give you information about the breach itself? And things like subprocessor duties, things that they're going to do in the response process. So if you dig into the contract, and especially for like large vendors or platform providers, you'll usually find this sort of stuff buried there in the in the 3-pitch font somewhere in the contract. So the importance of reading contracts, make sure you have this sort of thing in there, right? And then with your counsel, sit down and map your data elements to state and federal triggers, right? Almost every state now has its own data breach laws that impact what is a data breach from the state's perspective, what constitutes one, what the thresholding is in terms of number of records or types of data, etc. And many have language that includes something like, in quotes here, reasonable likelihood of access or that sort of thing. So, read through with your legal counsel to find out, after you understand the contract, look at what the law demands, and then compare those two. Work through it. Having that legal presence on your incident response team is really important to make sure that you maintain compliance with the law and all of the regulations that apply to that data. So ensure they're part of that process to stay protected. And finally, increasingly, folks are relying on cyber insurance or some other insurance policy that covers these sorts of incidents that might occur even in cyberspace. But it's important to know that some policies require notice before you engage outside incident response or public relations or law firms, right? So make sure you read those policies carefully, have them reviewed legally. You want to make sure you route any sort of those drafts or technical memos through your counsel if you want to maintain privilege so that you can sort of protect that data from being released or subpoenaed or any of that sort of thing. And keep a short legal checklist in your incident response binder so that you don't have to reinvent it when something happens, right? You want to make sure you understand thoroughly what your cyber insurance policy requires of you, so you don't put yourself in a position where the insurance company says, "Nope, we're not gonna pay for that." Right? So make sure you understand what they require. Make sure you understand what the law requires, and then go check your vendor contracts and make sure that those contracts reflect those requirements that the law and your insurance company put on you. So let's talk real quick about what happens initially when an incident is first discovered, right? When you're responding in those first critical 2 hours, uh, you you know, speed of course does matter, but it's speed with documentation, right? Um, so in the first 2 hours, there's a lot going on, but the most important things is that you need to create a structure that brings order to the process. So that could be initiating a war room, right? Getting your incident response team together, huddled in the same place with the resources they need, and start documentation. Make sure you get that log started so you document everything that you're doing, right? And validation, right? A lot of folks waste a lot of effort and resources responding to incidents that turn out to be nothing, right? So that you want to validate the incident and try to scope it as early on in the process as you can, right? And that's sometimes hard with third parties, right? That's why it's so important to have those belly buttons that I called this person at my provider to get information about what they know right now, right? Make sure that you notify your council and leadership, and then make sure you send a request for information, right, to the vendor. Make sure that you've documented that because you want to show your due diligence in this process. Um, and of course, you want to post a brief internal holding note with a time for the next update, right? You want to establish this sort of consistent, repetitive update process from which you document what is going on and what happened in that period and what you expect to happen in the next period, and then continue to have those updates on a regular basis. So let's talk about how that might break down. So in the first 10 minutes, you want to open, a chat or a bridge, and you want to start that transcription. You want to get all of your incident response folks together, and you want to start documentation and start sending out those queries, finding out, validating that an incident actually did occur, and try to get an initial scope for what that incident involves. You want to validate in that first 30 minutes, right? That the signal, is this your data? Is your data actually affected in that vendor's system, right? And try to get an idea of the number of people involved, right? From your data map, you can just roll right to that page, look for that vendor, and go, okay, it's every employee for the school district, or hey, it's only third through fifth graders, etc. That you could go, worst case, I know that the total information in this system is just what I have on this paper, so we know an initial scope just by referencing our own records, right? In that first hour, you want to make sure you send that request for information, contact the vendor, and get that information communication channel open. They may not have information for you that early in the process, but you want to make sure that you open hailing frequencies, right, so that you can get the information flowing as quickly as possible. And you want to start drafting up language based on what you know, and then consistently hit those updates so that all of the people involved get updated on a regular basis. That means leadership and stakeholders, and ultimately perhaps even victims and those affected, right? Have a place or a reporting cadence that they can believe in, right? All of these sorts of things engender trust. They make the folks involved feel as if, hey, this incident is well controlled. While it's unfortunate, at least it's well controlled and competently managed, and that is the key to a successful incident response. And at the end, you want to make sure that you're in the last hour. You want to start collecting artifacts, right? Start getting your evidence, the data that's available out there, so you can thoroughly understand and inform decisions on how you as an organization are going to respond. Remember, it's not your systems, it's the vendor's system, so you're less concerned about the technical steps to remediate and more on decisions you have to make on things like, is this a data breach from a legal and from a community or a sort of uh, interpretation, and to inform your decisions around messaging, whether that's internal, external, with outside agencies or with the public, right? And I'll foot stomp this again. It's important to timestamp these decisions and include traceability as to who makes these decisions, right? This running log of time-stamped, this is what the incident response team did, is how you show one, compliance with the law, but two, competence in your process and due diligence on the part of your organization. Because remember, these vendors, while they're their own organization, are acting for or on behalf of your district, your school, or your college, respectively. So, in many ways, the parents and regulators are going to look to you to make sure that that from the organization's perspective, you did your due diligence. Right? So documentation, hugely important, and make sure that you set some expectations around reporting tempo, right? Because this sort of deflates the pressure around leaders, and it also keeps everyone from kind of doing their own thing, right? It's all about establishing sort of this predictability around the response process and creating a sense of calm in an incredibly stressful environment. So let's talk for just a second about getting information from vendors, right? A request for information, right? Now, this is going to meet with various degrees of success, right? Because oftentimes vendors are caught unawares. They don't necessarily have information to give you. But a good thing to keep in your head is that you don't need adjectives, you need artifacts, right? So marketing speak or spin does not help your constituents, the people whose data was infected, and the data that you gave to them to safeguard. Right, so you want to ask what happened, when was it detected, which systems or data was involved on the vendor's part, can they provide any sort of evidence, right, around data access or exfiltration? Can they give you record counts or even spitball ranges of records that might have been involved, whether they have contacted law enforcement, right? That's important to know. Whether they have planned notices that they are going to release, the vendors, and to establish kind of a timeline from the vendor, like when can you get back to us with more information, right? You want facts, not a lot of flowery language. You want them to drop, hey, these are our indicators of compromise. Here's snippets of our logs, or here's a paraphrase of what occurred in our logs so that, you understand what happened here. And hey, the vendor says, hey, we're going to give you a daily update and we'll do it through email, et cetera. But having that sort of creates this expectation of a structure that's going to go forward from reporting and providing you with information that you need. So you can even create sort of a template for this. So this is going to be kind of an official request, right? You're going to send this in to your point of contact. It could be like a one-page document, but you want sort of sections that define the event that happened, how they detected it, what they're currently doing to contain it, systems affected, data elements if they have them, counts as we mentioned, that sort of stuff. Planned notifications, right? The last thing you want to do is duplicate notifications in a bunch of places, right? Because that increases the chance that your story and their story are two different stories, right? So if they plan notification and what that notification might be, and establish an expectations for next updates, right? And provide a secure path for that. Having some sort of a notion about how you're going to get, say they want to provide you with some documentation that's maybe not public, having some sort of secure way to establish those communications and get those artifacts that your team needs to make decisions. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be specific. Oftentimes these vendors are in just as much crisis, if not more, than you are, because in many cases these large vendors are, many thousands of schools, right? And so they are probably running around in a panic just the same as you. So if they can't give you exact counts, see if you can get ranges and perhaps confidence levels. Like, hey, we're 80% confident that this database was, or we're 50% confident that these data were affected. Anything that they can provide you like that helps to shape not only your internal messaging, but it also helps you to understand what occurred. And as long as they continue that information flow, that will refine over time, and you'll get that information faster that way. So the big decision, obviously, is do we notify? When there's something happening around these incidents, at what time do you need to notify folks? Notification is one of the first and most effective ways that you fail at incident response. All right, so first of all, the long pole in the incident response tent, especially with third parties, is almost always state law. So knowing the applicable state and local laws on breach notification is going to help you to build your plans accordingly, right? And the biggest way you can make these decisions quickly is to kind of sketch how your notification decision tree looks, right? If sensitive elements are likely exposed, prepare notices now while forensics continue. If uncertain, draft a notice and stage lists or a call center and set a 24-hour reevaluation. If it's clearly out of scope, define why and provide evidence on what prevented the harm. Perhaps the data was encrypted or some other reason. Right, so creating that decision tree kind of helps you fit the facts that you understand into it and make decisions on whether or not you need to notify. Here's the skinny on this. Regulators and folks that are going to come and audit your decisions, they value reasoned decisions over perfection, right? You can make some mistakes, but if you have reasoned decisions that resulted in some unforeseen thing, that is still not half as bad as not doing anything, right? Or reacting on the fly, right? So make sure that you document the rationale in your log. It's one of the important reasons why documentation is so important. It helps defend your decisions. It empowers and informs your future decisions. You can look back and say, oh, well, we were in this situation 3 years ago, we did this and bad things happened, so let's try a different way. Right? It enables lessons learned, and it provides metrics for process improvements. Like if things fail, you can try something else and see if it works. A couple of things to remember here. No logs does not equal no risk, right? So if you don't document anything, if you don't have logs of what your rationale was, what your decision-making process was, that's an extremely risky position to be in to defend yourself, right? Document the why you do things or decisions are made during the incident response process, and it will reap benefits. Remember, when we're talking about incident responses, just briefly to touch on evidence and forensics, it's still your incident, even if the server isn't yours, right? So ask for things. Request a legal hold and keep a single evidence register on your side. You may not get anything from the vendors. They may just blow you off. But it is always better to ask and be denied and then record the denial than it is to never ask and be in a deficit of information. Make sure that when you request this stuff to be specific on time range and the format you want to be received, ask for normalized times, right? UTC in an offset or something like this. If artifacts will be delayed, request a near-term narrative and a schedule for delivery, right? If they can't give it to you right now, hey, when can you get it to me? You want to track what arrived, when, and from whom. Make sure you document that stuff. If it's things like log files or other things that you're getting from the vendor, make sure they provide you with checksums so that you can validate that that information is accurate. You can even meet with them, their incident response team, depending on the situation, and offer information exchange so that they can help understand things like single sign-on logs or EDR traces for correlation with some of the investigation they're doing on their end. But clean evidence shortens the post-incident autopsy, and it strengthens your why we did whatever it is story. Right? So make sure that you kind of build these processes in. When we're talking about counsel and insurance, engage counsel early to make sure that you structure your requests and preserve privilege where it's appropriate. And make sure that you notify your insurer if you're required. Many policies mandate it before you hire certain vendors or send mass notices. The purpose of doing all of this is to prevent self-inflicted wounds, right? When we tell you to contact your counsel early, ask legal to stand up the incident email and direct sensitive drafts through them, right? Attorney-client privilege protects legal advice and strategy, but it doesn't protect raw facts. Keep your factual running log separate and professional, right? But your decision-making processes and that sort of thing, those can be directed through counsel, right? The privilege management helps to protect data in the decision-making process. And secondly here, around insurance, many cybersecurity policies require like 24 to 72 hours notice, or they'll term it as prompt notice, and they have a list of what they call panel vendors, right? So check that policy. Make sure you understand it thoroughly, so you know how quickly you have to notify your cyber insurance and what vendors like incident response, forensics, or PR vendors that you might have to use as a condition of your insurance policy. The thing here is if you hire other firms first without getting the approval of that insurance policy, you can jeopardize your reimbursement, right? So call them, get a claim number, ask for a panel list and the process to retain those firms. Expect that you might get a reservation of rights letter, which is the carrier protecting their options. Think coordination beats chaos, right? Share a short cadence with counsel and the carrier. Route your public statements through your counsel. Align with the insurer if they're funding all of that, right? Make sure that they're kind of involved in the public response or the PR process, so that they are in agreement, right? If law enforcement is involved, it's critical to make sure that you have counsel manage that lane too, right? Especially when you're talking about law enforcement involvement. Again, documentation here, super important, right? For every major choice, whether or not you notify, whether a specific vendor is retained or what the scope of services for that vendor will be, write a one-liner rationale with a date and time and the person making that decision, right? The log is gold for, state boards, auditors, regulators, attorney general inquiries, all of those things, right? That log explains your due diligence process and your decision making. Communications, this is where you will fail if you fail. The tech stuff is easy, and when we're talking about third-party vendor issues, the tech stuff usually is all on their end of the equation anyway. So most likely if you fail, it will be because of communications. This is why it is so important to have the communications or PR folks engaged, whether that's your own staff or through your insurance company, through a PR firm that acquired through the insurance company. Make sure that you check with them first before putting out messaging if it's your own PR staff. But regardless, you want the messaging to be clear and concise, right? Offer a 2-sentence statement initially. We're investigating a cybersecurity issue at a service provider. Operations continue, next update at noon, right? That says, hey, look, we acknowledge there's a thing going on. We're investigating that thing. We will give you an update here. So now they have not only an expectation that you're on it, but you also have given hey, at noon, we're going to get more information. Now, when we're talking about internal messaging, it's a little different. You want to focus on where to get facts. Where are the places you can go to get information, whether that's a SharePoint page, an FAQ, email, something of that nature. You want to explain things like how to route media and legal requests as they come in, because people will start to get these things in a variety of places, and how to talk to families, right? How to set that tone. If we're talking specifically about external communication, make sure that you establish times, right? And keep them, right? You want to establish this cadence of communication where information is provided on a regular basis. And even if you don't have anything new to provide, it can be a reiteration saying we're continuing to work, expect more information at the next update. Coordinate with that vendor to avoid conflict. So what you don't want is your announcement to be, oh, well, we don't have anything more for you, and the vendor puts out something at the same time with a bunch of new information, right? So coordinate that to make sure that you don't step on each other's toes from a communications perspective. So when you make notification, it's important that you make it in a way that engenders an understanding of the facts and puts your response process in a good light, right? So, for example, if your notice needs a translator to translate technical speak into plain English, it's the wrong notice, right? The notification can be where trust is won or lost. You want it to be clear, concise, and to the point, avoiding speculation and needless enumeration, right? Most folks don't care if 200,000 students were involved. They just care if their student was involved, right? So avoid all of those kind of needless, superfluous facts. What matters, clear, concise, to the point, and avoid speculation. Provide to the degree that you can what people can do, like action steps they can take and where they can find more information, whether that's your website or the vendor's information website. What that does is tells the victims who are getting this notification that, hey, you've got a solid handle on what happened. You're providing information and being transparent. You've provided them with action that they can take, because no one wants to sit around feeling helpless, and where they can go to find out more information on this. They'll walk away from that notification feeling like this incident, unfortunate as it is well in hand, and these folks have it together, right? So you want to make sure that it contains what happened, a brief factual summary, what data was involved, what you're doing to address this incident, what they can do to protect themselves if it's sort of identity information or something of that nature that was accessed, and where they can go. If you provide that, most of the time your notification will be a success. So one quick way to get on the bad side of the victims, whether they be parents, students, or employees, is to make them feel as if they're on their own, right? Lots of times you say, yeah, there was a breach. You hear organizations say, yeah, there was a breach. Here's some credit monitoring. Keep an eye out. Okay, see ya. That leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, right? They feel as if you lost their data and now they're on their own for the damages. Instead, offer some how-tos, right? With maybe some screenshots translated where needed. Publish help desk hours, response expectations. If you decide to provide monitoring or if it's required, explain it in one sentence and link to the enrollment, right? Celebrate early reports from families and staff who see something odd. Make sure that you say, hey, thank you very much for reporting that. So that makes them feel as if you're looking out for them, makes them feel as if they're not alone in the process. So the least dramatic breach is one that your master service agreement or data processing agreement already solved, right? So this is why contracting is so important. Those written agreements, right? Establishing expectations. You think of the master service agreement as the house rules for working together, right? It's general terms, payments, liability caps, dispute resolution, how services will be delivered. Why it matters is the MSA also references or attaches the data or security terms, right? What they're doing, what your expectations can be on security. If you don't see cybersecurity or something to that nature or expectations around incident notifications, that sort of stuff, you're kind of left in a gray zone, and that's where things go wrong. Your data processing addendum or agreement, it's a specific agreement that spells out how the vendor must handle, protect, and use your data. It's kind of the data rules, as it would be, that's layered on top of the MSA. What you'll typically see is privacy and security obligations, breach notices, timelines, data return or deletion sort of outlined there, sub-processor rules if they're contractors, they're subcontractors, auditing rights, compliance with laws like HIPAA, FERPA, GDPR, that sort of stuff. All of that you will likely see in the DPA. Right, so think of the MSA as an umbrella and the DPA as kind of the privacy security add-on. So you're going to want to review those things, right? Up front when you're initially having this conversation with the vendor, look at those things and see if there's any kind of red flags there. Silence around data security, breach notification, all of those things, those are red flags. If you do spot these things, you just kind of want to just put the brakes on for a second. Have discussions with the vendor around that. See if they can provide some assurances. Change the agreements, provide addendums, that sort of thing that can address those specific security concerns around ensuring that you're compliant with the law, first of all, and also to make sure that in the event that something goes wrong, you have clearly outlined expectations as to whose responsibility what is. So here's 6 things that you can do, you can insert into your contracts that save future you, right? The count, I love it. First of all, notice and cooperation, right? 24 to 72 hour notice, access to artifacts, timelines, information exchange, that sort of thing. Referencing controls, right? Single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, making sure that the vendor has these things, like logs or log retention that allow them to react in the case of an incident. Make sure you have a good understanding of, hey, does this vendor have a ton of subcontractors, and do those subcontractors get held to the same security expectations as the vendor does? Solutions or clarity around indemnity and cost. Who pays for what part of a breach when that breach occurs at that third-party vendor? And where can you get some assurance? Do you have the right to audit that vendor? What kind of auditing processes do they do? Do they have SOC 2 or ISO audits, and that assuring you that you have the right to ask for access to those audit reports to make sure that they are in fact holding up their end of the privacy and security bargain, right? And 6, refer to your FERPA duties, right? Avoid making use of student data for marketing purposes, or restricting data reuse or sale or ads. making sure that they don't have expectations that the data is theirs, that they have to return or delete the data at the end, and principles like data minimization, so that they only get access to the data that is required for the purposes that they were contracted. So if you do those 6 things, you will make sure that your contracts are much better aligned with the issue of data breach down the road should you run into something like that. Again, these written agreements are where the rubber meets the road and where you set yourself up for success. So to the degree that you can, evolve your written agreements and see if you can insert these 6 anchors into your agreements to make sure that you have the greatest visibility, the most cooperation, and the quickest possible incident resolution. So how are your vendors doing? That's a great question to ask because they probably don't know, right? So you can develop yourself a due diligence pack. Think of it as a way to remove anxiety. The goal here is clarity, not gotchas for vendors, but prioritize your top 10 vendors this quarter, revisit periodically or when things majorly change, and keep their answers in a folder next to that contract and the data map that you have for that vendor. So incident response can find them as fast as they can if they need to, right? Vendors often have canned responses, so you ask for links or PDF. You don't want marketing blurbs, so not marketing nonsense. You want actual answers. Your future self will certainly thank you at 2 a.m. when you have a vendor incident. Remember, it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. It could be a 1-page questionnaire with check boxes, right? You want to you can have things like, hey, what data elements? Where do you store your data? What are your retention policies? Do you have logging? How long do you keep your logs? What's your patch cadence? Do you do pen testing, or do you have some other attestation process in place? Do you segregate our data from your other clients, right? Those sorts of things, just 1-pager, have them answer it. They can answer it with attachments. Say, hey, here's our a map of where we store our data. Here's our retention policy. Here's our logging policy. Yada, yada, yada. You can keep all of those things right in that little vendor section along with the data map, right? And it can help inform that data map if you don't have all of those answers up front. So segmentation and minimization are your friends. You may not be able to completely prevent a data breach, but you sure can limit the damage if one occurs by implementing some segmentation and access control best practices, right? Least privilege scopes, universal admins, reducing the number of super users out there. Rotate keys on a schedule and remove stale app integrations, things like this. From a network perspective, small degrees of segmentation, even little ones, beat super flat networks, right? Just any kind of segmentation that you can put in, VLANs, etc., can make it harder for attackers to traverse the network and give you a sort of a risk reduction. And an added bonus here, segmentation speeds up your recovery, right? You can isolate systems and prevent damage, or if a system is damaged, isolate that system from the rest of the environment, reducing, helping you get your arms around what's going on and resolve it faster. Tabletop exercises. When a breach is at a vendor, a tabletop helps you practice the messy sort of handoffs, right? Who handles a vendor, who asks for the logs, who drafts the family notices, and who keeps leadership calm, right? Sports team scrimmage, fire departments drill endlessly, actors rehearse, but many schools never practice an incident until it's live and it's happening to you. Right? The tabletop exercises let you safely test your decision-making, your communications, and your vendor coordination without the reputational damage and risk that comes along with a real breach. Breaches involving vendors, remember, are messier because half the facts are outside of your control, right? So how to practicing how to request information interpret vague vendor statements, and decide when to notify stakeholders prepares you for the reality of a vendor breach. Tabletops are super cheap, and they're the safest way to build your own incident response capability and muscle memory, if you will, around incident response. So as promised, let's talk about this a 10-step incident response card, right? You need a card, not heroics. You can create this on basically a one pager that's standardized just a couple hours, the first couple hours of a response, and identifies the hard calls so that your team doesn't have to improvise or fly by the seat of their pants under pressure, right? So develop it, print it out, pin it up on the board, and practice it twice a year. You want this to be super boring, because if it's boring, then you can do it under stress when you need to, when there's an actual incident out there. So here's an example, sort of a simple, break glass in case of emergency playbook. You can, create this as a laminated playbook that turns your breach apocalypse into another Tuesday, right? So one, assemble and scribe, right? Get everyone into the war room, wherever your incident response is going to be centered. Assign a scribe or start transcription and open the timestamped log and begin your documentation. 2, verify, confirm that the signal is in fact a real one, that this is actually our data or our vendor that's involved. Your goal here, weed out false positives and try to understand the scope, right? You want to scope quickly. Having a data map lets you just flip to that vendor section, look at the data that they have and all of the details about that vendor, and allows you to kind of quickly scope what the worst case scenario might be. Maybe it doesn't involve you. Maybe you dodge the bullet, but in the worst case scenario, you'll understand what data is there, why it's there, how long it's there, and all of the details about the vendor. Engage with your leadership and your counsel. Stand up your privilege lane, confirm insurance notice windows, right? So you can get them involved within that window, and make sure that you have a good understanding of, hey, do they require us to hire certain vendors for our, technical incident response or PR team or whatever the case may be. You want to send that request for information as quickly as possible, right? Get the facts flowing to yourself. What, when, which systems, what data? Do you have some evidence of this? Is there a timeline that's available? Is law enforcement involved? And what is your plan for public notice? Next, preserve, ask the vendor for a legal hold. Request logs, IOCs, hashes, any kind of evidence that they can provide to you. Remember, having data yourself is way better than asking the vendor for a description. Notifications, right? To make that decision about notification based on the best available facts, right? If it's unclear, stage a draft and list and set a reevaluation time, right? Come back to the decision. Document the why you make decisions, especially around notifications. On communications, you want to make sure you draft those communications in a way that is human and factual. If you don't have much to put out right now, put out a holding statement and commit to a cadence. Say, hey, we'll talk to you at 2 o'clock or at noon or 5 p.m., whatever it makes sense there. And coordinate that cadence with the vendor to make sure you avoid clashes in communications. You want to mitigate, if this is something that impacts you that you have to take technical actions on, for example, password resets or multi-factor authentication enrollment, or verifying things like maybe direct deposit changes or something else, and stand up your helplines, right? Put somebody on those phones in case, when the parents call or when the authorities call, that you have somebody there ready to answer with some information. Brief and improve, right? Close the loop with your leadership, with boards, with regulators as needed. Develop your written agreements in the future based on what you've learned as part of this in the especially in the post-mortem phase of the incident response. Remember, you can outsource all kinds of functions and services, but you can't outsource the accountability, right? So create this card to help you there. Print it out, review it quarterly, and make it dull through repetition. This should be something that just happens in the event of an incident. So here's some pitfalls and quick wins, right? Here, 4 traps to dodge. A lot of folks are paralyzed waiting for some kind of certainty, right? Statutory clocks don't stop while you debate, right? So decide on best available facts, document the why, and update as evidence improves, right? So don't let uncertainty stop you from complying with what you need to do in your incident response. Kind of avoid copying vendor PR. If your community, if you're involved with your community, they care about your statements, your students, your staff, right? Your vendor boilerplate rarely addresses the actual needs, right? It's marketing flash. It's something that's kind of vendor speak. So make sure that yes, certainly reference it, but you want value add there. You want to have your helplines, your timing for notifications, your own plain language notice and FAQs. Another big trap is forgetting about sub-processors, right? Many breaches live several steps down the chain, right? Your vendor has vendors, right? And a lot of times, and especially in the last few years, we've seen that where a vendor's contractor is the source of the issue, right? So many breaches kind of live in this weird realm where it's your vendor's vendor. You want to make sure that your vendor's vendor is in scope, that you understand that your vendor has these vendors, and that there's some assurance there that your vendor's vendors are held to sort of a similar security and privacy expectations as the vendor itself. Another trap to avoid is one and done communications. A lot of times folks think, oh, we'll just work out the details, we'll put out one notice, and that'll be it, right? Unfortunately, that usually leaves big breaks of silence, and then the released communications don't really toe the line, right? Silence breeds rumor. Rumors are incredibly damaging during an incident response. So make sure you have a cadence and keep it. Even if the update is sort of, we don't have anything new for you, here's a reiteration of what we know. We'll be back with you at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. or 12 noon to provide any new information that we have, and make sure you keep that cadence going. That's going to avoid speculation and sort of derail the rumor mill. Some quick wins. Build a one-page request for information template that you can send to a vendor, right? That talks about, hey, I'd like information about the event, the detection, all of the things that we talked about, and hey, let's establish a cadence for updates, and keep that in your incident response folder. Add a breach cooperation clause to your MSA DPA templates, right? In the written agreement with those vendors. Make sure that they say, hey, yeah, we're going to work with you around any potential breaches or incidents. Turn on your SSO or your single sign-on or multi-factor authentication for admin access on your top 5 vendors, right? Kill shared support accounts to the degree that you can. And critically here, map your top 10 data feeds, right? Your vendor, elements, transport, frequency, retention, owner, etc., and store the sheet next to your contracts, right? Make sure that just run out and get your top 10, your biggest vendors, and build that data sheet for those vendors, and keep it in your incident response folders next to your contracts, right? So really, what this should tell you is that you're faced with a lot of choices. Unfortunately, when a vendor breach happens, it's a sticky situation. But there's a lot of things that you can do up front. We've talked about a lot about them, creating those, creating that 10-step IR checklist, creating those data sheets for your vendors. Pick the top 10 at first, or the top 5, whatever you think the right scope is, but move forward on that. Incremental improvements are way better than waiting for something to go bump in the night before you respond. So I would encourage you to take some of these best practices we talked about today, putting them in place. Have a tabletop exercise, include those vendors, find out those vendors' points of contact information, fill out those sheets, etc. So I know we covered a whole lot of information today. So here's some final food for thought. If you don't have an incident response plan, you should have one. So work to get one in place and then train it. Make it boring. You want to make sure that folks understand where to go and that you have a team there and that it's properly resourced. You're going to need data privacy and security awareness training for all your employees. It's not just students. It's not just teachers or administrative staff. It's employees, all your staff, your contractors, any researchers you work with, or requiring it for third parties in general, right? You would protect your data this way. So make sure that the third parties that touch your data have similar requirements around data privacy and security awareness. Understanding your legal requirements to comply with applicable federal, state, and local laws, hugely important. And in the event that you find yourself in a tricky situation, whether it's just creating your incident response plan or whether you've had an incident and have questions, consider calling us here at PTAC. We've got dozens of years, half a century or more of incident response experience here on our staff. We're connected with a lot of different resources, whether it be federal agencies or others out in the education space. Give us a ring. We can probably help you. If nothing else, we can commiserate on how much incident responses are a pain and that they are always stressful. So don't be strangers. Give us a call. Speaking of PTAC, we do have a ton of resources out there. Our data breach response checklist is a really good one to kind of put your data breach response processes to the test. It's a great straw man if you're creating your own incident response process with your organization, so check it out. It's on our website. We have downloadable data breach training kits, which are kind of those scenario packets that you can use for tabletop exercises. They're great. They're rebrandable for your organization, and you can make changes. They include everything you need to kind of set one up. And we have PTAC student privacy training, whether it be short YouTube-style videos on a variety of subjects in student privacy and data security. We also have online training modules, which include things like FERPA, understanding the nuances of FERPA, and data sharing. So I would encourage you to check out those resources as well at our website. We also have a great newsletter, and that link, you can subscribe to our newsletter. We promise we don't spam you. We won't sell your information. What we're using this newsletter for is to let you know about all the great things that are happening at PTAC, the new resources that are emerging, things like cybersecurity threats and that sort of stuff. Lots of good information. So we encourage you to sign up for that. And finally, here is our contact information. Again, don't be strangers. We love to talk to you. You don't have to wait for an incident to give us a call if you have questions about student privacy or data security. You can reach us at that number on your screen, 855-249-3072. By email at privacyta@ed.gov, or you can reach us at our website, which is a fabulous resource for all of those things, student privacy and data security, and that is studentprivacy.ed.gov. Again, that's studentprivacy, all one word, .ed.gov. And with that, I will say thank you so much for hanging with me as we talk about this incredibly important information on incident response with third-party data breaches. Again, if you do have any questions about the content in this session, please reach out to us at privacyta@ed.gov. We'll get back with you. Give us a call if you'd like. We'll give you a call back and we'll discuss any questions that you might have. And with that, I will say thank you again for your patience, and hopefully you got something valuable out of today's session, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.